Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're enjoying these untold Hollywood secrets, please hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking celebrity revelations. Your support means the world to us. Now let's get into this amazing story. September 12th, 1973. Clint Eastwood was reading the morning trade papers in his Malpaso Productions office when he came across an article in the Hollywood Reporter that would change entertainment journalism forever. The headline read, "Clint Eastwood, the most overrated actor in Hollywood." What Clint did next wasn't just a response to criticism, it was a masterclass in how real power works in the entertainment industry. Within 18 months, the journalist who wrote that article would be working at a small-town newspaper in Nebraska, and the Hollywood Reporter would issue the most humiliating public retraction in trade publication history. This is the story of what happens when you mistake a legend's quiet confidence for weakness. Now, let me back up here and explain who wrote that devastating article, because understanding his arrogance makes Clint's response even more satisfying. The piece was written by Richard Steinfeld, a 35-year-old film critic who had been at the Hollywood Reporter for 8 years. Steinfeld considered himself the most insightful entertainment journalist of his generation, and he had built his reputation on controversial takes that generated buzz and sold magazines. Richard had this theory that Hollywood was too intimidated by box office success to honestly evaluate talent, recalled former Hollywood Reporter editor George Christie. He saw himself as the truth teller who would expose the gap between popularity and actual ability. Steinfeld had already written scathing reviews of several major stars, questioning their acting abilities and suggesting that their success was based more on image than talent. But Clint Eastwood represented everything that Steinfeld believed was wrong with Hollywood, a TV Western actor who had transitioned to movies, become internationally famous, and was now directing his own films despite what Steinfeld considered limited dramatic range. The article that would destroy Steinfeld's career was triggered by the success of High Plains Drifter, Clint's second directorial effort, which had just become a major hit. Steinfeld couldn't understand how someone he considered a mediocre actor was now a successful director, explained entertainment historian Leonard Maltin. It offended his sense of how Hollywood should work. Actually, let me read you some excerpts from Steinfeld's article, because understanding how personal and vicious it was makes Clint's revenge even more justified. The piece began with a question: how did a wooden television actor with limited range become one of Hollywood's most bankable stars? Steinfeld went on to systematically demolish Clint's acting abilities. Eastwood's performances consist of squinting, mumbling, and looking vaguely menacing. His dramatic range extends from stoic to slightly less stoic, but the real venom came in his assessment of Clint's directing. That Eastwood has been allowed to direct major studio films represents everything wrong with a business that mistakes box office receipts for artistic merit. The article concluded with a prediction that would prove spectacularly wrong. History will remember Clint Eastwood as a footnote, a television actor who briefly fooled moviegoers into thinking he was something more than a pretty face with a distinctive squint. When Clint finished reading the article, he didn't get angry. He didn't call his publicist or demand a meeting with the Hollywood Reporter's editor. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He started making phone calls, but not to complain about the article, to gather information about Richard Steinfeld. Clint understood that the best way to deal with critics isn't to argue with them, observed director Don Siegel, who worked with Clint on several films. It's to make them irrelevant. Within days, Clint had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Steinfeld's professional history, personal relationships, and financial situation. What he discovered was that Steinfeld wasn't just a critic, he was a frustrated screenwriter who had been trying to break into the industry for years without success. Richard had written several scripts that had been rejected by every major studio, revealed former Hollywood Reporter colleague Army Archard. His criticism of successful actors was partly motivated by his own failures as a creative artist. More damaging was what Clint learned about Steinfeld's personal life: mounting debts, a gambling problem, and a pattern of professional jealousy that had already damaged several of his relationships within the industry. Armed with this information, Clint began implementing what would become the most systematic destruction of a journalist's career in Hollywood history. Phase 1 was subtle but devastating. Clint quietly reached out to every major director, producer, and studio executive he had worked with over the past decade. Not to complain about Steinfeld's article, but to share what he had learned about the man's character and motivations. Clint didn't ask anyone to retaliate against Steinfeld, recalled producer Jennings Lang. He simply provided information and let people draw their own conclusions. The effect was immediate. Within weeks, Steinfeld found himself frozen out of industry events, excluded from press screenings, and unable to get interviews with major stars. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone who Clint Eastwood had identified as unprofessional, explained former MGM publicity chief Frank Liberman. But Clint was just getting started. Phase 2 involved Clint's business relationships throughout the industry. As an actor, director, and producer, Clint had worked with virtually every major studio in Hollywood. His films had made hundreds of millions of dollars for these companies, and his professional reputation was impeccable. When Clint quietly let it be known that he considered The Hollywood Reporter's coverage unprofessional and biased, the magazine's relationship with the entire industry began to suffer. Studios started pulling advertising from The Hollywood Reporter, recalled former Variety editor Peter Bart, not because Clint demanded it, but because they didn't want to risk damaging their relationship with one of their most profitable stars. Trade publications like The Hollywood Reporter depend on studio advertising and cooperation for their survival. When that support disappears, the publications become financially and professionally vulnerable. But the most devastating phase of Clint's response was still to come. Don't forget to comment below and let us know what other legendary Hollywood confrontations you'd like to hear about. Phase 3 was where Clint demonstrated the difference between celebrity power and real industry influence. Rather than attacking Steinfeld directly, Clint began promoting other entertainment journalists, critics, and reporters who wrote thoughtful professional pieces about the film industry. He gave exclusive interviews to writers from Variety, Entertainment Weekly, and other publications. He provided behind-the-scenes access to his film productions. He treated serious journalists like the professionals they were. Clint was showing the industry what good entertainment journalism looked like, observed critic Roger Ebert, who benefited from Clint's new policy of cooperation with professional writers. The contrast with The Hollywood Reporter became stark. While other publications were getting exclusive content and industry access, THR was increasingly marginalized. It became clear that if you wanted real insight into what was happening in Hollywood, you didn't read The Hollywood Reporter anymore, explained former Los Angeles Times entertainment editor Charles Champlin. But Clint's masterstroke was revealing the information he had gathered about Steinfeld's failed screenwriting attempts. Through carefully placed leaks to other entertainment journalists, the story emerged that Steinfeld's attack on Clint wasn't objective criticism. It was the jealous rant of a failed writer who resented successful people. Once the industry learned that Richard was a frustrated screenwriter taking out his personal failures on successful actors, his credibility was completely destroyed. Recalled former Entertainment Tonight producer Jim Van Messel, the revelation that Steinfeld had gambling debts and had been writing increasingly desperate articles to generate controversy was the final nail in his professional coffin. Richard went from being seen as a fearless critic to being seen as a bitter failed writer who was using his platform to settle personal scores, explained former Variety critic Todd McCarthy. Within a year of his attack on Clint Eastwood, Richard Steinfeld was unemployable in Hollywood entertainment journalism. The Hollywood Reporter, facing a boycott from major studios and losing credibility with industry insiders, was forced to make a choice: support their controversial critic or repair their relationship with the most powerful people in the entertainment business. On March 15, 1975, 18 months after Steinfeld's original article, The Hollywood Reporter published an unprecedented retraction and apology. The statement read, The Hollywood Reporter regrets the unprofessional tone and personal nature of Richard Steinfeld's recent criticism of Clint Eastwood. We acknowledge that Mr. Eastwood's contributions to the film industry as actor, director, and producer deserve respectful professional evaluation, not personal attacks. We apologize to Mr. Eastwood and commit to maintaining higher standards of journalism in our coverage of the entertainment industry. Richard Steinfeld was fired the same day the apology was published, but Clint wasn't finished with him yet. Using his extensive network of industry contacts, Clint made sure that Steinfeld's reputation followed him wherever he tried to work. When Steinfeld applied for positions at other entertainment publications, editors would quietly receive calls from studio executives who just wanted to share some concerns about his professionalism. When he tried to get work as a freelance writer, his pitches were rejected by publications that didn't want to risk their relationships with major stars and studios. Richard became essentially unemployable in entertainment journalism, recalled former Los Angeles Herald-Examiner editor Jim Bellows. Nobody wanted to hire someone who had been publicly destroyed by Clint Eastwood. By 1976, Richard Steinfeld was working as a general news reporter for a newspaper in Lincoln, Nebraska, covering city council meetings and high school sports. The man who had called Clint Eastwood overrated was now writing about Nebraska high school football. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood's career continued to flourish. The outlawed Uze Wales was both a critical and commercial success. The Gauntlet proved his versatility as an actor and director. Every Which Way But Loose became one of the biggest hits of his career. By 1980, Clint was not only one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, but also one of its most respected filmmakers. Richard Steinfeld had predicted that history would remember Clint as a footnote, observed film historian David Thompson. Instead, history forgot Richard Steinfeld entirely. The destruction of Steinfeld's career sent a clear message throughout entertainment journalism. Personal attacks on established stars could have severe professional consequences. After what happened to Richard, entertainment reporters became much more careful about the tone and substance of their criticism, explained former People magazine editor Richard Steinfeld. Nobody wanted to be the next journalist destroyed by a major star. But the most satisfying vindication of Clint's response came in 1992, when he won Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director for Unforgiven. Standing on the Oscar stage, accepting recognition from his peers for artistic achievement, Clint had definitively proved that Richard Steinfeld's assessment had been not just wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. That Oscar night was the ultimate response to everyone who had ever called Clint overrated, observed entertainment journalist Army Archard. It proved that longevity and consistent quality matter more than trendy criticism. In his acceptance speech, Clint thanked his collaborators, his family, and everyone who believed in the work when others didn't. Industry insiders understood the reference. Richard Steinfeld watched the ceremony from his apartment in Nebraska, where he was working as a part-time sports stringer for the local paper. The overrated actor he had tried to destroy was accepting the highest honor in filmmaking. The critic who had predicted Clint would be forgotten was already a footnote to history. The lesson of Clint Eastwood's response to the Hollywood Reporter wasn't about revenge, it was about the difference between temporary power and lasting influence. Richard Steinfeld had the power to publish his opinions, but Clint Eastwood had the influence to make those opinions irrelevant. Clint taught the entertainment industry that real power isn't about making noise, explained former Warner Brothers executive Terry Semel. It's about making results. September 12, 1973. A critic called a legend overrated. 18 months later, the critic was unemployed and the legend was more powerful than ever. Some battles are won with words, others are won with decades of professional excellence that make the words meaningless. Richard Steinfeld learned the difference the hard way. And Hollywood learned why you don't pick fights with people who have earned their legendary status through consistent success. The magazine survived but barely. The critic disappeared entirely. And Clint Eastwood, he just kept making great movies. Because that's what legends do. They let their work speak louder than their critics, and their work lasts longer than anyone's opinion about it. Sometimes the most devastating response to criticism isn't an argument, it's a career that proves the criticism was wrong. Clint Eastwood didn't just destroy a critic's career. He made criticism of his work look foolish, and that's a victory that lasts forever. Unlike the careers of people who mistake opinion for fact, and arrogance for insight, Richard Steinfeld learned that lesson too late to save his career. But just in time to understand why Clint Eastwood is a legend, and why legends don't argue with critics, they outlast them.